You are watching Fugitive Red Eye, and this is another DVD review sort of thing. I actually just recently finished watching this series, which in Japanese is a really long name, like Higurashi no Nakakoroni, I think. I don't know, it's really long. It translates to something along the lines of When the Cicadas Cry, but when it came out in the US, they shortened it to When They Cry. It's a very good series. Now, I will say this. When I first went into it, I thought it was going to be something completely different. I expected something along the lines of, say, Elfin Lied or something like that. I expected a ton of gore and a lot of stuff like that, but that's not really what I got. Now, a lot of people who recommended this to me told me that the first season was the only one actually worth watching, and that the second season wasn't worth watching, which I'll give my thoughts on that in just a moment. As you can see, this is actually the DVD of the second season. I don't actually own the DVD or Blu-ray of the first season. I actually watched through the first season on Hulu and then bought the second season on a whim because I wanted to figure it out, because according to Amazon reviews that I'd read, the second season explained everything. Now, this is where things get incredibly spoilery, so if you don't want spoilers on the plot, I would recommend that you don't watch it. Watch from here. So, first off, let me start by saying, describing a little bit about what the series is like. So, for the first season, it's all divided up into different arcs, which all end with many of the characters dying in tragedy. It's set in in like an isolated village known as Hinamizawa, I think is how you pronounce it. There's all sorts of legends and stuff surrounding the town, stuff that's supposedly about curses and things. So anyway, the first season, each arc, time resets after each arc, and at first I wasn't sure if the arcs all mattered, or if they were just interchangeable what-if scenarios, but that does actually get explained in Season 2, as many people pointed out to me in the Amazon reviews. Anyway, but the second season definitely explains a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense in the first season, so here's what I'm going to talk about now. Like I said, time resets a lot, and I'm going to talk about the first season first, and then I will talk more about this season. So the first season, I would have to say my favorite arc in the first season was the first arc. That actually had a great undertone to me, and honestly, if the series had continued with that, and didn't have the whole time resetting thing and all the stuff that it did, if it would have just been about the first arc, I would have been happy. In fact, it might have even been a better series, but I'll get onto that in a moment. So basically, the plot goes like this. In this rural village, every year on the night of this cotton drifting festival, people die. More specifically, for the last 4 years, one person has died and one person has disappeared. And our first arc starts off with that season just approaching, and a newcomer to the village named Keiichi Maibara. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing these. I don't speak Japanese, so. But anyway, so Keiichi, he just recently moved to the village and doesn't know much about this festival. And in the first arc, they make it very creepy. Like, the characters all seem out to get him, and it seems like his friends are going to kill him. And the arc does end. Again, these are all spoiler-ridden, so again, if you want to stop the video, I wouldn't blame you. But if you've seen it, great. So, at the end of the first arc, he ends up beating his friends to death with a baseball bat because they're coming after him with this injection. And it seems like they're almost possessed or demonic. It's very creepy at first, and that's what really drew me into the series, was that. But then immediately, Keiichi also gets killed himself, and that really threw me off. I'm like, wasn't he the main character? Then immediately, episode 5 or 6, I can't remember which, came along, and time had reset, and it was a completely different arc where it was basically another world. Basically, time had gone back to before the point of the Cotton Festival, and people were, basically, things were different. Things had changed. But it still ended in tragedy, as it went for the further following arcs of the first season. Now, one thing that becomes apparent in the first season, towards the end, is that no one seems to remember these previous arcs or previous worlds as if they never happened. So I was confused as to whether or not they actually did. But then, in one episode towards the end of the first season, Keiichi actually remembers beating his friends to death in that first arc. So that really threw me off too. I'm like, okay, so these did actually happen. And also Rika, that's the character pictured on the box here, talked to him as if it was perfectly normal, and she remembered it. Also, at the end of the first season, she mentions how she's stuck in an endless June, meaning she's been stuck in the month of June 1983 for hundreds of years. Well, at least that's what's revealed in the second season. She doesn't say it was hundreds of years in the first season, but it is later revealed. So on to the second season. I really liked the tone of the second season a lot more than the first, just because it focused a lot more on explaining things. It was a lot less brutal because, although I mentioned that the series wasn't anywhere near as gory as I expected, it was still fairly brutal, especially in the first season. But the second season seriously toned down the brutality, but it did have a lot more plot to it. Like, they explained things, they tied it all together, and they wrapped up a lot of the loose ends. Now, according to the people on Amazon, all the loose ends get tied up in Season 2, but there's still one that bugs me that I'll go over towards the end of this review. But, anyway, Season 2, basically Rika it is revealed to have memories of all of these previous worlds, and she's been living through it hundreds of times, and basically, in the end, she has to find a way to stop the tragedy from happening, and eventually she does. And that's how the series ends. Again, spoilers. But, one thing I do want to mention is that I think that's enough about the plot, honestly. There's a lot of stuff that happens, and it does have a fairly good ending. There's another thing at the ending that I don't quite understand, but I'll go over that as well. Now on to my thoughts of the actual show's structure. There are things that I absolutely loved about it, and then there are things that I absolutely hated. In fact, there were times where I had to fight to watch through the show, because it starts off, the first opening scene of the first season shows him beating his friends to death with the bat, and that's like, oh shit, this show is going to be brutal. But then it shows the intro, and then I'm like, okay, after the intro, it's like complete tonal shift. Everything's all cutesy, and I mean, one of the characters is obsessed with everything being cute, and it's filled with like comedic, really shitty anime stereotypes and cliches, which almost drove me away from the show, to be honest. But then it switches back and forth to this really dark undertone, then back to all this cutesy shit. And that's another thing I liked better about the second season, is although they toned down the brutality quite a bit, they also toned down a lot of the cutesy shit, so it was a lot more of a cohesive season. Now, as far as that goes, in the arcs, each arc would have its own main character. I assumed that Keiichi would be the main character throughout the entire series, but he was not. It switched back and forth, and then Rika ended up becoming the main character through pretty much the entirety of Season 2. Now, I will say this about the series. Again, they initially lead you to believe that this is a curse that's causing all these people to go crazy and kill each other or die. And they lead you to believe there's demons involved, like the characters are possessed by demons or possess demon blood. However, towards the end of the first season, you find out this is probably one of the things I liked less about Season 2 than Season 1, just because and it wasn't just Season 2, it was also the end of Season 1, where they basically revealed that it wasn't demons, it was parasites in people's brains. Which, you know, I'm okay with, but I thought the whole demon angle was a lot creepier, and I think it would have actually been better if had they stuck with that, but again, I like it for what it is, so they did actually have a lot of explanation, and basically they explained away all the demon shit and the curse with these parasites. And they cause a disease called Hinamizawa syndrome, I believe they called it. And, I don't know, it has its ups and downs. I would have been happier with the whole demon plot, but this was okay. Now, another thing I wanted to touch upon that is kind of a question I have, really. Because, every time the world switches, I'm not sure if the other world ceases to exist, or if it still exists, and then another timeline starts in an alternate universe. The reason I'm confused on this is because, although Rika is in every single version, and the characters in each version can retain some memories of it if they try hard enough, one thing I have a question about is because at the beginning of Season 2, they show like 30 years later, or something like that, where it's the end of the final timeline of the first season. So I don't understand if these timelines cease to exist or if they continue to go on or what, but that's just kind of my own observation. I'm not sure on that. Now, another thing I wanted to mention was the fact that this is probably one of the gripes I have because it never gets explained. Despite the fact that some people claim that everything got explained, this is one thing I couldn't figure out. There's a scene during, I believe it was the second arc, where Keiichi kills Satoko's abusive uncle and buries him. However, when he goes back to check if the body's still there, it's not, and her uncle is back, alive. So what I'm wondering is, what happened with that? Did he actually kill him and he came back to life? Was it a hallucination caused up by the parasites? What exactly happened with that? And another thing, Satoshi... Oh, I dropped the thing again, but Satoshi or Satoshi, I'm not sure how to... Again, Japanese is not my language. But Satoko's older brother, Satoshi, I'm going to fucking butcher that, but he had a similar experience when he beat their aunt to death. He was worried that she was up and walking around, although she was actually dead. So that's it for what I think is the loose ends on that didn't really get tied up. Overall, I would say this is a very good series. It was not quite what I was expecting initially. I was expecting it to be a lot more brutal. It still has quite a bit of brutality. I mean, it is still, kids killing each other and torturing each other. And I mean, there's a scene where one of the main characters rips off like 3 of her fingernails, and you actually get to see her fingers after they're ripped off. It's kind of brutal. And again, there's a scene where he beats his friends to death with a bat, and then there's a scene in the second season where they butcher this fucking guy and cut him apart. I mean, you don't actually get to see it happen. It kind of goes a Hitchcock route, whereas you're about to see it happen, but you don't. Like, it leaves it to your imagination. Like, one of the ways people die in this is clawing their own throat out. You never actually see that happen, but you see them about to claw their own throat out. So, again, this was a very good series. I would encourage anyone to watch it if you like, darker series. If you're into that sort of thing. One thing I will say is, this is definitely something that has very mixed feelings in my mind, just because it switches back and forth in tone so often. I think if they ever did another series similar to this, I would stick completely to the dark shit and cut out a lot of the comedy and cutesy shit. But other than that, I would rate it a very good series, at least an 8 out of 10 probably. Again, it's kind of hard to say because I have very mixed feelings about it. There are parts that I absolutely love, and then there's parts that I absolutely hate. But overall, I would actually say this second season is actually a lot stronger than the first, even though a lot of people would say that the first is better. I completely disagree. I think the second season is much, much better and more cohesive. This is actually initially based off a game. I believe it was a visual novel, which a lot of animes are based off if they're not based off manga, although they usually get both if that's the case. But overall, and this did actually get both as well, as I recall, reading on Wikipedia. But anyway, I think that about does it. This is a little bit more in-depth of a review than I usually do. Again, it is still unscripted, so I apologize if I missed anything. I tried to put this together as best as I can, but let me know what you think. Did you enjoy this series? Did you enjoy the review? Do you want to see more reviews like this, or do you prefer it when I do it using gameplay? But as always, this has been Fugitive Red Eye, and you have a great day.